Welcome to Jung at Harp, episode number 161, The Closure That Opens. I'm Kathleen Wiley, a Jungian Psychoanalyst in North Carolina, and I am here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer, a mentor, a creative. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jung at Harp. And almost every week we come together to have a conversation about a question that's perking around in our lives and probably yours too. And we don't start with answers, we start with questions and our dialogue. And you're joining in vis-a-vis the platform if you're watching live, where you can put in comments for us to view. We see what perks up and what answers that we might use in our life day in and day out to move forward in our creative process and creating the life we want. What those answers are that emerge in the conversation. So, DHC, do you want to talk a little bit about how this question bubbled up to the top today?
Yeah. So the closure that opens, and the ideas of closure, ideas of completion. So I've been working on a lot of projects that, and for my whole life, I've been working, creating, and then I'm sitting here at this point in my life and realizing, oh my God, there's all these things that are complete in that I've performed them or I've recorded them, but they are not complete in the sense that they are available for other people to perform. And as a composer, ever since I was a kid, my whole thing is creating vehicles, creating things
Mm-hmm.
that I can then watch other people bring to life. Even though I love performing as well, but for ever since a kid, when I would get on stage, it would be like I was thinking, okay, so if you were doing this is how you do it. Like that's what I'm thinking when I'm on stage. And I've got, it's changed. I've gotten more so that I really love that space and the safety of it. But I'm sitting here with all these things that are not have not received closure, and so I can play them. The people in the Legacy Project team can play them, but they're not out in the world and published. And we keep getting stuck at this moment of, oh, okay, how are we going to deal with mistakes and letting, we put this music out in the world, and then if there are mistakes, we want to place a way for people to be able to come and find out about those mistakes and fix them. Shouldn't be necessary, but now that I'm discovering that a lot of my pieces are being used in contests and people are being judged on whether they're playing it correctly or not, I realize that it is really important for me to actually make available any updates to the pieces, so that if someone is playing it the right way, or someone's playing it the way I play it, but that's not the way it's written in the music, and a judge is saying you played it wrong, that there's a place for them to go and say, no, it is okay. I'm not going to be disqualified because I played it this way. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that I realized how important it is for me to be able to have a published place where I'm describing the changes, and as pieces develop, or as we discover something can be different. So that's been one of the things that we've had to do in order to complete the next piece and get it out in the world. And then there's also, dotting the I's and seeing the first performance and what does it look like. And so all of that. So I'm feeling that there's all these pieces, this method of the modulating warm-ups and the Soñando en Español that we've been working on for 2 years, and they're still not in closure. They're still not in the hands of the next. The next hasn't opened. And so I'm really sitting in that unclosure place where the next hasn't opened. And I also realize that there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, when I finish this, then the next thing is going to come. And what's that going to be? Because I finished The Golden Cage. It's all done. But now comes the whole part of like, okay, now how do you get it into theaters? Here's a whole new part of life that I have to discover, or a whole new person, an agent who does that I need to connect with. So that's where that came from, Kathleen. What would you
Yeah,
like to say about that, especially from a Jungian standpoint?
I'm going to say to Carrie, welcome. We're glad you're here too. I so two or three things bubbled up for me that are like little tributaries off of the main topic. So I'm just going to say that, but I'm going to follow the branches for a minute. I mean, part of what it sounds like you're struggling with is once you put it down on paper and you make it available for someone else, so your composition goes down on paper, it becomes available for something else. It suddenly has a static form. And if there's anything I know about you, you're not static. you are you are evolving. And if we're lucky, we're all evolving because the life force isn't static. I mean, the life force is flowing all the time. It flows in with every breath and out with every breath. There's life is not static. And your creative process is not static. And all of us, our creative process is not static. Yet, if we're going to share our creative babies with the world, there has to be a static form in order for it to be contained so someone else can begin to relate to it. And it sounds like what you're bumping up against is there are some closures, some static forms, some printed, published pieces of music that are your compositions that when you go to the music and look at it, it's not how you play it anymore.
Right.
It's evolved. And so someone gets your music, they go to YouTube, find you, listen to you playing it because they value the living process and they're not attached to the page. They will make the alteration and play it the way you do, but then the judge gets the static form and here's the conflict, right?
Right.
So there's so many other variables that you as the creative artist or I as the creative artist have no control over.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were saying that, and I was thinking, well, the problem is not, I mean, I've been taking it on as my problem,
Mm-hmm.
like I have to come up with the right way to do this, or I have to, whatever. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, that is just wrong. No performance should be judged based on the notes. That is the last thing in the world it should be experienced on. I mean,
I'm only smiling because I think this is a big divide, isn't it, between between the different genres of music. I mean, I think so.
right, and it's
Yeah.
what I'm constantly teaching in music, and that what I wish I knew more about in other parts of life, which is when I'm teaching, like if I have all these classes called, Mercedes Beyond the Page or Baroque Flamenco Beyond the Page, where I take the page and I break it down and say, okay, so this is what I did, this is what I did in that piece, like I did. I don't know if this will be heard, but like, that's what I did. But maybe you can't do that for whatever reason. But what that is, or let's say you're in a meditative environment, and so that is not appropriate. What is that? That is also it's the same thing. To
Mm-hmm.
me, it's the same thing from a functional standpoint in terms of how it's inviting you into the piece. It may be a different kind of expression on a day. Like some days, someone might come to your door and you're like, "Oh, come on in! I'm so happy to see you." And some days you might be like, "Hi, I'm so happy to see you."
Mm-hmm.
And the piece is the same way. This is an introduction. This is the doorway to the piece. It might be played different on each day. So I guess, and that's exciting to me, the
Yeah.
fundamental of what it is. And now I think, is that an archetype? No, I don't know. I don't know. You take it to Jung.
Well, I don't, I mean, we might could play with and say it's an archetype. I mean, archetypes are universal templates. So you've got a universal template of rigidity, which is it's got to be played the way the music is, and you've got a universal template of spontaneity or of a more living, moving form. So we could play with that there are these two archetypal instinctive energies, one towards static form and one towards expression in the moment. I don't know that we really gain anything by thinking about it that way, but I think what we are talking about are different ways of engaging with music.
I see that we're going into a different question, which I would love to ask at some point,
Right.
because that idea of rigidity versus fluidity,
Right.
which and one of the beautiful things about music is that it can hold that.
Mm-hmm.
It can hold that and still have complete integrity. The piece has complete integrity regardless of how you play it. But we come onto this app, and if I don't click the buttons right on it, we will not be heard.
Right.
So there's a difference, and I think I'm constant. So that's another thing to talk about, which is that, and maybe it's relevant here that I'm struggling with closure on these things because I'm afraid that I will do something that invalidates it. That I will do something in not knowing, like, for example, the Golden Cage. We finished it. We presented the script to some agent, and it was passed on. Now, I don't know whether it was passed on because they didn't like the piece or because I don't know enough about the formatting of I'm not an expert in formatting plays. And so if they looked at it, they might think, well, this person doesn't know what they're doing simply from the way it looks. So we're going to pass on it. And this is something I don't know in the world. For example, when I first wrote my first piece for orchestra, um, it, I knew exactly what I wanted to hear, and I wrote it all down, but I didn't know what it was supposed to look like on the page. I had not been an orchestra
Mm-hmm.
composer before, but I took it to the conductor, and God bless him. He didn't run screaming out of the room. He looked at it and he took a deep breath and he said, "This is not going to work." And I had this moment of like, okay, that there goes that dream. I guess I'm never going to write for orchestra. And then, thank goodness, I said to him, okay, what can make it work? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is part of the idea of closure or completion. I said, what can make this work? And he said, well, we could bring in this guy and he could complete it. He could do that. And I said, what is that going to cost? And he said, he told me the number, and I was like, well, that's pretty much what I'm going to get paid. Whatever, let's do it. And that guy came and he lived at my house for 5 days, and what he basically did, and then we went and we played the piece, and then the conductor was like, wait a minute, there's too much stuff here, and he crossed out all this stuff, and he basically crossed out all the stuff that the other guy had added, which made me realize I had known what I wanted to hear, but if I couldn't make it look like I knew what I was doing, nobody knew that.
Well, you have to put it in a commonly understood language, is how I would say it.
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
And if I don't know that language and
right,
I don't really know how to, so that's where we're sitting. So, like, Gustavo
right.
is the team leader of the Legacy Project team. And he and I are both musicians, and we're both good musicians, but we don't know the technicalities. And we also don't know, we've got this thing, it's pretty much done. And I can send it to a graphic designer, but they're not going to be thinking, "Oh, you're missing the copyright thing on this page." Like, there's not a finisher, and this is, I think, the crux of this thing: a finisher.
Hmm.
That sense of knowing that even if it's not perfect, it works. It's complete. It's not going to be invalidated, or it's not going to be I'm not going to realize, oh my God, I forgot to, bleh, you know. And it's one of the reasons I love music is that it doesn't have that element of like, well, you did it wrong. Well, you know, it's music. It is what it is. It's like, help, Kathleen.
Well, but I mean, I think again, part of what I'm hearing is this recognition there is a time for static form and
Mhm,
there's a time for creative flow. And
mhm,
when you got ready to take to perform with a symphony orchestra, and the director said the music as you had written it, the
Mhm.
form you gave him, wasn't going to work. There was a static form it needed to be in for the orchestra to be able to
Correct.
all work with you in it.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a time for static form or rigidity, but
Right.
let's say static form. And then there are other times for creative expression. And if we get back to your original example of someone playing your music, your composition as published
Mhm.
for a contest, if part of the rules of the contest are playing according to how the music is written, that is the static form in the world in which they are entering. And we can rail against that, or we can say this is the land I'm going into.
Right.
So for this competition I need to play it like it's written, even though my own alive performing version of it or sharing version of it
Right.
is going to be different. It's like, I keep thinking about the spiritual master Jesus, given to Caesar what is Caesar and unto God's what is God's. I mean, we have to live according to the lay of the world. Maybe this agent passed on the golden cage, not because it had anything to do with the format, but because, from what I understand about getting agents, you can go through hundreds before
Right. Right.
someone. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
and then you get an agent, and all of a sudden your work is famous. I mean,
Right.
they get it in the right hands. So I think the other thing is with closure, we have to ask ourselves, what is ours?
Mm, mm,
What is ours and what isn't ours? What's
mhm,
my responsibility and what isn't my
mhm,
responsibility? If you aren't confident that, let's just say, the golden cage is in the
mhm.
static format that the industry wants, then you probably need to hire a technician. You don't need
Right.
a
Right.
creative. You need
Right.
a technician for that. So I think part of closure that opens is really being able to see what's really needed. What is really needed.
I'm also hearing from what you're saying, it is a couple things. Understanding my role and
Mm-hmm.
actually understanding my role and acknowledging my role as a creative. And it's really interesting because I just realized, on this app, I've taken on the role of the tech, even though it frustrates me and drives me crazy. And why have I taken that on? I mean, I love because I love
Mm-hmm.
tinkering and I love knowing how it works. Like there's all that. But I just realized that I have not acknowledged like there's something in me that does that I can feel it emotionally that does not think I'm good enough as an artist,
Mm-hmm.
good enough as a creative, and therefore I have to somehow blah 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 blah. I don't know what it is, but what I'm hearing really is acknowledging and accepting, deeply accepting my role.
Mm-hmm.
That's and then the other thing I realized as you were speaking, and shouldn't be no surprise to me, is the perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
of thinking that I can and the control, trying to be control this a contest situation. But you're absolutely right. If those are the guidelines and the manners, the custom of that country,
That's right.
then and so I have to accept that. And then I also have to accept that I'm not responsible, that it's I am accessible enough as a composer that if somebody's playing my piece and they said, can you please write me a note saying that this,
Mm-hmm.
and they write it out for me and just make, I would write that and they could hand it to the judges. That could happen. And that what I'm hearing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, is how isolated I've made myself and how I haven't made myself open to the collaboration of the
Mm-hmm.
technician. I've had it like, I haven't been able to find that person. I don't know what they're called. I don't know where to look for them. I mean, like, blah, blah, this is my excuse. But
Right.
really, what I'm doing is isolating for the fear of what I'm going to find out I did it all wrong or whatever. That's what I'm hearing in what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Wow.
a part of closure is really getting clear and discerning what's our responsibility and what isn't. And then also, what's the support we need for the part that is our responsibility?
Well, I just had this revelation, and again, it's I have this revelation over and over again. At the end of the golden cage, what is what is the moral of the story? The cage, it's not the cage that traps you. It's when you lock yourself inside, and it's when someone else reaches in and you reach back. It's the reaching back. When we reach, that's what unlocks it. And I see that I have created that cage
Right.
all around this. And I'm sure there are people reaching in and offering, and on the internet saying, I can make your music look correct.
I'm sure there are people who do that.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, support. This is, I think, in all areas of our life, not just our creative life, but our personal lives and our self-care. People, people, as a general rule, don't want to stop and acknowledge and feel their own need. Yet, until we stop and acknowledge and feel our need, we can't get the support that will actually allow us to move however we want to move in the world.
Right, you're right. I mean, I'm just realizing, I can go to AI today and ask AI to help me define what is my need. Because you're
Hmm.
right, that's the thing that's been so difficult. And I was laughing because I was imagining an advertisement. Are you a brilliant composer whose music just looks like you don't know what you're doing? Well, I'm here to help you with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's bring this back to the closure that opens. I mean, what I'm getting out of this, and this is really beautiful because yesterday I went to see a hypnotist. And
Oh,
yes, and part of it was also about closure. This is all in my birthday week celebration.
oh,
Um,
that's right. Happy
yeah, thank
birthday.
you, thank you. It is a happy birthday, and what I really got was that I don't have to go out and reach for things. I can be accessible, and thing and I can recognize that the gift is there.
Hmm.
So I'm really seeing that just in what we've talked about so far, all of that. I'm seeing, that acknowledging my role
Hmm.
in the closure that opens. In other words, in the closure that will then open my life and my work to others in a new way. And for people who think, well, you're out there, you have not seen my attic with all the pieces that are not, all the secret things that are not out there. But yeah, I've got the idea of roles. I've got the idea of what you just said about acknowledging your needs and then being able to give voice to them.
Yeah,
And that's the other thing for me, is to give voice to,
right.
so that then I can, and I'm also realizing closure for me. I keep thinking
Hmm.
it's going to happen, something I have to do. You better get closure. But I'm seeing no, it's not a thing that happens for me
Hmm.
alone.
Hmm. Hmm.
If it happens alone, then I'm just closing myself inside.
Yeah. Well, before we went live, one of the last things I said, because we had played with the idea of closure or completion that opens, and I said, there's a difference between closure and completion in my mind. Completion is something comes full circle and it's finished. Um, it's whole. Whereas closure, sometimes we close things that aren't finished, that aren't whole, because sometimes there's no way forward. Sometimes it just needs to perk. I mean, it's an interesting distinction to think about. When is closure completion? When is and is completion a closure, or is completion just a marker on the journey towards a greater wholeness? In some ways, I think my sense of you is your written music has always been a completion of this rung of the ladder. And as you take it to the next rung of the ladder, it may become more complete, more whole. Something may be tweaked. And that's a very different experience than closing it and being done with it. So anyway, those things seem to be somewhere here in the mix.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So maybe, and you're right. I mean, once something is complete, for me, it has everything to do with the next handing it to the
Mm-hmm.
next, and or practicing it, or having it in the world, no longer working on it, but being working with it, because
Mm-hmm.
because what always happens at that point is it evolves. It
Mm-hmm.
evolves beyond anything I could have imagined, and it's interesting, this idea of completion versus closure. And every time I say the word closure, it feels like like an empty room, versus completion, which feels, the sound of the word is more exciting to me. So maybe it is more completion that I'm looking for, but it has to be imperfect, because I keep, no matter how much I know I'm a perfectionist and I'm working, working around with it, it still rules me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Angela's Arian used to always say that our perfection keeps us from feeling our excellence.
Mm,
That perfectionism gets in the way of our excellence because excellence is different than perfection. And so I think to really step into our excellence, we have to realize that it's never closed. Perfection would close things off,
right, right.
but that there's an excellence where it's complete. It's excellent enough for this point in time. Um,
Well,
yeah.
let's talk more about complete. Um, and we can, I just realized we
Mhm.
can change the name of what this is. Um, closure, or no, see, there we go. There I go. No, I'm going to change it. Rather than allowing it to be, closure, the closure that opens, and to realize that maybe there is no closure. I don't know. I mean,
Mhm.
my cat died. Am I complete with my cat? Well, there's a little shrine of him in the living room where he used to sit all the time. And yet it also opened up things in my life. And what is closure anyway?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about death, since you mentioned the death of your cat, and I think
Right.
could say death is one kind of closure. But I think the other thing that happens, and we know this from the cycles of nature, and I very much, and Jung believed this about our psyche, is that when there is a death of a form, then life force energy is released that can take a new form. So if our bodies naturally decay, they're organic compounds that go into the soil that then will grow certain things. Natural there are natural burial grounds now where, when the body is wrapped in a shroud and placed in the ground, there's a small tree that's also placed there near the body. And so the body decomposes and then becomes the tree.
Hmm.
So I think that part of what belief for me is important, and I think this is part of the difference, that the feeling difference for me between closure and completion, is completion is an ending where energy is then free to take a new form. Closure to me invokes images of locking things up.
Hmm.
But if you are, for instance, with your legacy project, wanting to get your compositions out in the world, I suppose in order to get all of those compositions cataloged and in the correct format and published, there will have to be, okay, I've gotten this one out there, and now
Hmm.
it's closed, it's set
Hmm.
aside.
Right.
There's a closure. There's a not constant circling back to it. Otherwise, you'll never get the rest of it published.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting because when I was, I've been working on the Golden Cage since I was 19. And
mhm.
there were many times of kind of closing it down in archival form. In other words, whatever I had completed, I had it all together, sometimes messy or whatever, but that's what allowed me to then take it out again 5 years later, and then take it out again 5 years later, until I could finally got to the point in my life that I knew that I could see enough of the story to
Mhm.
actually tell it. And so there was a closure, Um, but it wasn't closed forever. And
Right.
it's interesting because there's another story that I love this story. It's called the Dukorsky syndrome. And I had gotten to the point in my life where I thought, well, I'm going to have to give that up. I'm never going to have the funds or the time to write that. That's the thing that didn't get written. And lately, I've begun to realize that that may not be true. I
Mm-hmm.
may, and so I may be able to open this up again. And it's a romantic story, and the music is very French, and just like it's all these things that are open and fun and full of dance. And um, I don't know what I'm getting to, just that there had been that closure, like I had given it up. I had
Right.
given up. And lately, and one of the things that was really interesting to me is I had pulled it out recently and tried to play it. And it's hard to play. I can't read it. I'm not a good reader. I can write it down what I want to hear, but I can't fluently play it. And I sat down and but all day long, all week long, I'm talking to students and saying, you know, what is the way that works for you? Find the way that works for you. If you can't do this, what can you do? What opens up fluency for you? But I wasn't hearing it in my own head. And I sat down and I finally heard it, what it opens up for you. And I was able to just write on the music different
Mm-hmm.
ways of writing the music so that I could fluently play it. And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly the piece was open to me and I could start living in it, which is part of what I have to do. Um, I'm also realizing that when I get closure on something, or when yeah, right, because it's never been complete. That
Right.
piece is not complete, but I did put it away, and now I have a new understanding that will allow me to open it up. And
Right.
maybe I have new conduits for funding, and maybe I have, who I don't know what is new for me. So
Yeah. So what you're talking about, I'm having the image of being buried alive or the dead coming back to life. So that in this case, that project, there was closure, but there was still energy perking
right,
in it and
like
in your
Sleeping Beauty,
connection to it.
not like a zombie.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll say like Sleeping Beauty. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, it came back to it, there was still an energy in it. Whereas I'm thinking about people toward the end of their life, um, and I have someone I work with whose mother's at this point now where they get to a place where they feel as if their life is complete. And because
Mm,
of various variables, usually health related, they're ready. They feel their life is complete and they're ready to let go and die because they trust, okay, there's a completion, but it's not an ending.
mm,
It's not like there is this sense that, okay, this is complete and there's something new that will come, but we cannot open to the new until we let go, until we feel, when people feel that sense of completeness, they let go. They're willing to surrender
right.
the form they've been in. And I do think that happens, that can happen in death, and particularly with older people who may, my mother at the end of her life, I mean, she said about a year before she actually did die, she was ready, that she was complete and she'd struggled enough. And so I think that there's something of that recognition again of the cycles of nature, birth, death, and recreation, rebirth.
Mhm, mhm.
The fall leaves are dropping now, the flowers are drying back. But with those things that are perennials, it'll look like nothing's there for the next few months. And then in the spring, something new will start to come back up from that same seed, that essence that survives. And so I think that, um, but the essence always needs a static form or a set enough form. Our bodies are formed at static enough, right? you
Yeah,
know there's a fluidity. I mean, both is needed. So I think with creative babies, it's also the recognition of, okay, this is the there's got to be a static enough form to pass it off.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm thinking about Soñando en Español. So Soñando, that's a three movement concerto. Baroque flamenco is the final movement. And recently, for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been working with my Legacy Project team to create a solo harp version of it. And it was very difficult because we were taking parts that I'd written fully for orchestra and trying to put them into harp form. And I had it that I should, they could do it. There's the orchestra part. You can figure out how to do it on harp. But eventually I realized that I actually had to play it badly for people to understand
Hmm.
what I was doing. And so painstakingly, we've spent all this time to create all three movements as a solo piece. And Verena has taken on, in Germany, has taken on the role of being the first person to actually play this piece in the world and
Uh-huh.
to create a story with it. And she did it first in October. The debut was there. And then we took it back and we started looking at it and like, okay, how do we change this? Especially, creating an overture for it, that
Hmm.
would lead to her storytelling. And I'm hearing what you're, and it was extremely uncomfortable process for me, in which I constantly felt like I didn't know how to write what I could play, and I didn't know how to say what that the way you're playing the rhythm. No, it's not the accent that the music would have, and so we've all been working together and everyone's been so patient, but you're exactly right. We have constantly created the next static version and then the next static version. And there were times when the music had, here's Verena's version, here's Sally's version, here's Deborah's version. And we would then look at all these versions and where's the truth within that. And now we have that static version. Now it's not out in the world. Verena's playing it. We
Hmm.
haven't published it yet,
Yeah.
but I wanted to wait until we have a video of her performance in order to actually publish
Hmm.
it. But I hear what you're saying about that static form.
Yeah.
And I'm also hearing that we too are a static form.
Right.
And none of those static forms, I mean, it's so funny because we go back and we listen to, Mozart or Beethoven or something, and it's perfect. It's perfect. Um, but I don't know if they would think it is.
Well, and is it perfect or is it perfect because someone has
Right.
said if you play it this way, it's perfect. I mean, again.
Yes, and well, actually, there are pieces that I've written that I know that is complete. That is,
Hmm.
I would not change that. There's
Yeah.
nothing. It says the story exactly the way, and it's complete. So, I guess I just need to accept that some dogs are big, some dogs are little, some dogs smell, I don't know.
It's very true. It's
So
very true.
so back to how are we doing on? I know we need to
Yeah.
end soon. Um, what what did what's evolved for you in this conversation?
Yeah, I'm really holding the difference between completion and closure locking things up, and completion being getting it to the next rung of the ladder in terms of forward movement.
Mhm.
And so that if I can allow myself to get something like my writing project I've been working on. Last week I was at a writer's residency, and I was managed to rework the introduction and first three chapters of my book. And I can't tell you how many drafts I'd already done by the time I got there last week. And during the course of last week, I landed that the complete enough version is like my fourth re-
Mm.
revisions and edits. I went through, so it's like, okay, this one would get complete enough. I'd print it, hand it off to a reader. We'd both read it, make some changes. I'd plug those in, print it, hand it off. We'd
Right.
read it, make mark changes. And so finally, just now, after like four cycles of that on top of what had already been done. So for me, I think it's just honoring that completion is valid, and that for anything to come into the world and share our creative babies, we have to get it to a place where we feel comfortable that it's complete enough.
What if we're a perfectionist who never feels that way?
Then you need to give up being a perfectionist because you'll never share.
Right.
If I wait until I do something perfectly, I'll never share. And for me, part of that is related to feeling shame, that somehow I'm bad if this person sees it differently or this person sees it differently. I sometimes listen to Kelly Nataris with K in Literary Design. She has a YouTube channel where she gives tips on writing, and anyway, you can Google her. So maybe if we had a way, we would alert her. I've given her a little free advertisement here, but but one of the things she shared is when she was working in a big publishing house that she worked under an editor who had had the honor of declining two books that went to other publishing houses and became New York Times bestsellers. And the point she was making is just because, this person doesn't like your work, it doesn't mean someone else won't, or that it doesn't have merit or validity. Now, those are my words. That's what I
Mhm.
took away from what she said. So like this agent who passed on the golden cage, it means nothing about the form or the value of the golden cage. Maybe he's the one who's passed up on the New York Times or the Broadway bestseller, you know?
Right.
And so I think it has something to do for me with self-integrity. You know, if I can get my own creative babies to a place where I can feel my integrity in it, in spite of the warts, pimples, blurbs, mess ups, mistakes, whatever, as long as I'm in my integrity, then I can let it go. I can share it because I know that I've done to the best of my ability and shared to the best of my knowledge. And one of the things I always say to people who work with me in my embodiment circle or other psycho-spiritual programs, it's what I'm telling you today. I hope it will be slightly different in 6 months or 6 years because I want to keep growing. I want my understanding to keep evolving. But if I'm going to share anything, it has to I have to have a place where it feels complete enough.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I need to just leave for 1 second to grab the cat, hold it so it doesn't make meowing sounds. Just a second.
Okay. Yeah,
Where
so
is it?
see,
Okay.
we have the blessing of the feminine. Cats are typically associated with the goddess energy. So we're getting
All
a
right.
blessing.
The remaining cat. Um,
Hi.
so this is Cosita. Uh,
Oh.
so what I'm taking away is that this idea that of understanding my role as the
Hmm.
creative, actually embracing my role of the
Hmm.
creative, and really embracing the role of the technician,
Hmm.
and understanding that if if I'm on stage sharing something, of course I need a technician, a sound technician, and a lighting technician, um, but I really can get my story across. I mean, if I'm live, if I'm telling my story, but as soon as I want to put it into a different form,
Mm.
I mean, I've spent my life developing myself as a performer, and therefore that is where I can speak. But if I'm going to go into a different form, I need the person who loves that form, who loves it and can speak in it,
Yeah.
and then to collaborate with them on creating on together the parents of this new form
Right.
of the piece.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things that I take away from this
Right.
conversation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that I may need help even defining for myself, so that I can call out to that person to find out who that is. And that's a place I can use something like AI that has no opinions,
Right.
but can just help me hone my own language
Right.
until
That's right.
until it feels right for me.
That's right.
So I would say, Kathleen, that I have a sense of closure.
Mm.
Opens up a new way of being,
Yeah.
and that I actually can put something away in a box, and that something is that I can and have to do it all myself, and that it's all about me getting better.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, so that the closure can actually be this question's answered enough to be set aside so the next question can emerge that will move you further down the path.
Hmm. And
Yeah,
also, I've closed out this idea that I have to be something that I'm
yeah,
not. And in
yeah,
fact, and that closure opens me up to a
yes,
relationship and a connection to people who are that. And
that's right.
Victoria, so happy to see you here, says, I agree that we need to embrace our role. If I don't see myself as a performer or creator, then I don't have any reason to share.
Yeah,
I see, right. So this reminds me of what you said, give unto Caesar, or that,
right.
and then I was thinking, and as all the animals of the kingdom of animals, speak in your voice. What is the
Yes,
voice that you have?
yes.
And uh, okay. And Victoria is saying, also, I like the idea that we don't always have to create to share. Creating for ourselves is okay too.
Yes, yes,
That's right, to fill our own.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this song, Raise Your Voice. That
Hmm.
so so I'm just gonna sing it.
Okay.
So it's just, you have a voice that's yours alone. This is the tie that binds you. Deep in the dark of evermore, that's how your soul can find you. So
Hmm.
raise your voice, for in the end it's all you have to bring. And this is the sound that turns lost into found when you sing. You have a voice that tells a tale. Nobody else can tell it as well. This is the tale, the song, the story of you. So raise your voice, for no one else can give the gift you bring. And this is the sound that turns lost into found when you sing. And I've always thought of that song only as speaking of our voices, and yet I heard something else in that song this time,
Yeah.
which is, this is the tie that binds you. This, your voice, being able to be in my role, to speak, to look, to ask for help, to find the words, that the words that will speak of my need. That is the tie that will bind me to others, that will allow me to connect to others. And this is the sound that turns lost into found. And I feel like I have been
Yeah.
lost, and yet that will be found.
Beautiful.
So thank you. I've sung that song, and I've committed to my therapist to sing that song every day to someone this week.
Good.
And I'm hearing something different in it this time
Yeah.
because of this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you so much,
Mm.
Kathleen, and thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Carrie, for being on. Letting us see your voice in the chat there, and for everyone else who has um, watched this while we're speaking or later on. It's just what what a gift to get
Mhm.
to have the conversation and to know more after the conversation, to have more connection. And Victoria says, historian Yuval Noah Harari. Oh, I keep realizing we can bring these up. Um, um, Said there is a difference between intelligence and being conscious.
Mhm.
Consciousness is what causes humans to feel shame. Ooh, artificial intelligence does not feel shame. Having to deal with complex emotions is human. Yes, and that's one of the reasons I do like talking to AI. It doesn't have any shame. I can be like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. And it's just like, oh, yes, of course, you're right. And Connie says, like a pregnancy, it's alive, but still needs to be born into a new life. Different colors, cultures can change its character many
Mhm.
times and constantly be reborn. I love this I'm hearing it in terms of a piece of music that you create for others. And I just would just like to say that I'm really excited because a Baroque flamenco, which was written for harp, is being played on a completely different instrument with an orchestra in Ukraine right now. And thanks to the Legacy Project Bridge, in which I've invited, they could not pay for the licensing. And so someone in the US paid for the licensing so that this concert could
Nice.
go forward. So I'm
Nice.
seeing these connections as well. So thank you, Connie, for bringing, showing us, reminding us that what
Yeah.
we create is life, and it is human and it is imperfect. And thank you, Kathleen. Thank you. It's so great to
Mhm.
see you. Will we be meeting
Yeah.
next week?
Yes, we'll see you next week.
Okay.